everyone, and welcome to this course on troubleshooting and monitoring RTI control systems. My name is Vincent Bova. I'm the training content manager at AV Pro, and I'm excited to showcase our XP Diagnostics and our free intelligent monitoring service, RTIQ. Before you begin, you're going to want to enable XP Diagnostics or make sure it's enabled. Now, it will be enabled automatically, but the way to do that is to select the processor and then go in to your settings and then make sure this Enable Onboard Processor Diagnostic System is selected. Now, we do that by default, but if you have older systems, you want to make sure that that's set. Now, in the past, we used to have an XP Diagnostics driver. Now we've relocated that into a web interface that is built into the processor. And pretty soon it will be evolving even more. So this is very useful information for future versions of XP Diagnostics. Now let's pretend we're, monitoring our system and we're troubleshooting it or just checking out the system statistics. Now, a lot of people think that when you're using XP Diagnostics, that you should only use it when you're experiencing an issue. Well, it's probably best to use it just to kind of get an idea of how your system is acting. And it also will familiarize you with what normal behavior looks like versus behavior that's a little bit out of the ordinary and might require some looking at or just some knowledge. So what we're going to do now is go to the communications menu. And in the communication menu, we're going to select Show Devices on Local Network. And we're going to find our main processor. Now, I've loaded a system on the main processor, so the processor now has the system file, and this is just a quick way to get to the diagnostics. Another way, you could just enter in the IP address of your processor, but I'm just going to click on this link and close out here, and this will launch a web page that will show me my XP Diagnostics. Now, at first, when you open it up, there's going to be a bunch of tabs that are on the left side, and you can hide these tabs by selecting this menu button. So if any time you want to kind of suppress that menu, you can hide it or unhide it. Now, the very first view you're going to be taken to is the dashboard. And the dashboard is going to give you the overall health of your system. For example, you'll see here where we're doing the Bennett resonance. It'll give you the name of the processor, the current firmware version, how long, when the system was programmed and loaded, and where that file, what version of that file, and where that file is located on your hard drive when you loaded it onto the system. Many times people might have confusion with their system files, maybe not sure which one they loaded onto the current version or which version to use. Well, this should tell you if you've managed your files accurately. Now, down below here under system info, some important information here, like your IP address, your MAC address. Your uptime is a really important statistic. So if your client calls you and says, hey, my system has been not working at times, you could tell how long the processor has been up for. And if it's been up since you last loaded on your file, well, then you know that the system is not failing in that sense of the word. Under memory used, this is where my memory usage is peaking at right now. So about 11%, which isn't bad. It gives you some memory free here, which really doesn't mean much without a percentage, and your system variable load. Now, a lot of these statistics can also be found in Integration Designer. So for example, if I select the global area and then hover over it, you'll see a collection of system information, how many system variables you're using, and what percent of capacity you're at, your views, how many view devices and how many views you have available, room counts and percent of capacity, source counts and the same percent of capacity, and driver counts. So this is a good basis before you even look at diagnostics. Now, getting back to diagnostics, down below, if you entered in your client information, it'll show up here as well as your own company information here. Let's move on to drivers. This is a very important tab. And as you can see, our drivers are using some memory right now. And some of them are getting some CPU usage here. Not much is being used because I'm not really interacting with your system. But let's say you're experiencing issues like latency or things aren't working as they need to. Maybe you're getting communication issues. The first thing you're going to want to do is come here and interact with your system. So you're going to select a couple of buttons and start your interaction with the system. As you can see, my CPU is all pretty flat because I'm not really interacting with my system, and your CPU average is pretty flat too. But while you interact with your system, your CPU might pop up and down at times. And you're going to want to make sure that your CPU average and your CPU isn't at an abnormal number, meaning let's say your average CPU is maybe 5%, and now you're working at a 10% CPU. Like you could see my television in my office just jumped to 9%, and my average CPU is 3%. Well, you got to watch that driver. That driver is what we would call a heavy driver. It's using a lot of bandwidth on our processor. And it is really helpful to monitor and see the devices that are responsible for either crashing your system or causing latency. Now, from my experience, when I ever have a system that is behaving erratically, and maybe a couple of drivers are the culprit, as you can see here, my television is showing a decent amount of CPU, and I only have one. Yeah, I'm using this Samsung IP driver. Now, what I might want to do is I might want to go to my system file, select that driver in the list, and then up in driver utilities, I might want to disable that driver. Now you'll see a little red mark in that cogwheel. I know it's hard to see, but you'll see a little red cogwheel, which means that driver is disabled. Now, when you load up your system, that driver will be discounted and will not use any bandwidth. And that way you can see if that alleviates some of the latency or crashing or any odd behavior you're experiencing. Of course, you have to load your system. I'm going to enable that driver now and load up my system. And now I'm going to just check for other things like third-party drivers. With third-party drivers, RTI has a lot of people that create drivers. And you want to make sure that you, if you're troubleshooting your system, monitor those third-party drivers correctly. You're going to monitor not just the CPU and CPU average, but the amount of memory that that driver is using versus the peak memory. You can see here that these drivers are all using different types of memory. Again, if you look at my Samsung TV, it's using a lot more, at least on the average, than other drivers. And if I click on it, it tells me it's using multicast, what my multicast port is, how much RAM am I using, how much my usage is currently or my peak, and the CPU, of course. So you're going to want to interact with your system and experiment with some of these drivers. Many people usually ask me, well, what drivers are the ones that are going to use a lot of memory? Well, when you look at XP Diagnostics, when you load up your systems, that's going to help you determine the drivers that are using more bandwidth versus the drivers that are using less bandwidth. And that'll help you with your assumptions on what processor to select and what drivers you probably have to be careful about loading up on. Now, of course, one of the big diagnostics that are missing here is your network diagnostics. So if you want to become comfortable with some network troubleshooting, some networks have onboard troubleshooting, like Ubiquiti has some onboard troubleshooting, certain switches do. But if you're looking at a software package, maybe Wireshark or something a little less complicated might be a good idea to use in place of XP Diagnostics if you're troubleshooting your network specifically. Because your XP Diagnostics could be fine, but you might be experiencing latency on the network that might require some investigation, okay? So that would be a separate skill set and some separate software, but still necessary if this all checks out. Now let's move on to RTI Panel. RTI Panel is going to show you your devices that are connected. Currently, I'm using a virtual panel. It's currently connected using LAN. So right now, my virtual panel is in the local area network. It's not being used outside the network or being used in addition to outside. You also have connection handles. Connection handles are just going to be, every connected device has a connection handle. It gives RTI panel devices their own unique connection handle when it connects to the processor. And a channel handle, well, the channel handle is, it's more like a communication pathway associated with that connection. So the only important thing you need to check for is that you're getting a connection handle and a channel handle. And you're going to get a state, make sure your devices are connected. So if your client says that their RTI panel devices are not connected, you could always check XP Diagnostics and see, is it connected or is there another issue? And if that said disconnected, well, you know there's another current issue going on. And timeout is how long it will time out when it doesn't have a connection. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward. Again, all your devices are going to show up here when they connect or disconnect. And it will take a couple of seconds for those to disconnect from the network. Now we're going to move on to Zigbee. Now I don't have any Zigbee devices, but I'm going to explain how to use this statistic. First, let's say you're experiencing communication issues with your Zigbee systems. Well, the first thing you want to do is have your installer or secondhand definitely interact with the Zigbee system. You're not going to want to be monitoring this while the system stays stagnant. You're going to want to interact with the Zigbee system. And now your remotes will show up onto your end devices. So let's say I got a T4X and a T2X. The name will come in. The RSSI or receive signal strength indicator will come in with a decibel reading. Now that number can vary, and it pretty much resembles the kind of statistics that you would see when you're looking at a wireless access point signal. So anything less than -70, that's a good signal. That's excellent. And in between 70 and 79, well, you're pretty average and you're good, right? Anything over 79, maybe to 80, well, that's below average, but still working. 90 to about 99, well, that could be a little trouble and problematic. You're going to be experiencing latency, and 100% is no signal at all. So you're going to use that receive signal strength indicator to tell you basically how loud the voice is of that controller. Now, LQI is something that also confuses a lot of people, and that's going to play in when you have a Zigbee network where you're using a coordinator and maybe a router and a coordinator and a parent device and maybe some underlying devices like an expanded Zigbee network. That's where LQI is really going to play in. Now, LQI means link quality index, and anything over 200, well, that's a good coherent Zigbee network. There's probably little, if any, packet loss, and everything is coherent and cohesive. Now, under 200, your LQI or link quality index is experiencing some loss in signal, in coordination, and communication. So you're going to want to troubleshoot that. Maybe relocate devices as they need to be. Maybe there's some interference that you've got to troubleshoot. We've got a separate webinar on Zigbee troubleshooting. Maybe change the Wi-Fi channel, depending on what your Zigbee channel is. And so the LQI, while the RSSI is how loud the voice is of the remote control that's sending that Zigbee or getting that Zigbee signal, the LQI is how clearly the words are understood inside your Zigbee network. Okay? Now, transmission packets and receive packets, you're going to want to make sure that when you send commands, your transmission packets are increasing and, of course, receiving. And that'll tell you if data is traveling back and forth to your Zigbee antenna or processor. Okay? So really important step. Now, we do have this within a driver. If you want to put this information on a remote control, we do have a counter driver that will give you the RSSI and LQI, but for a specific remote. Now you could roam around and test the received signal strength indicator and the link quality index as you roam around the property. Okay. All right, now UPnP. Why would you access UPnP? And it's going to take a few seconds to fill in here. UPnP, or Universal Plug and Play, are going to be a device list that's useful because it's going to give you a quick, who's alive on my network view without having to scan the network manually. So any device that are using UPnP, you're going to see. Now, a lot of people, you do need a little bit of network prowess to know what kind of devices use UPnP and if those are enabled or not. So as you go into the settings of these devices, you might see a UPnP setting like on your cameras or devices. You're always going to want to enable that. And of course, on your router, certain routers out there show up on site with UPnP turned off. That's not going to be particularly helpful. So this will just give you a coherent list of devices that are using UPnP. And now you can know that the network is finding UPnP devices, which is a good confirmation that things are alive on the network and possibly working properly, at least from a communication standpoint. Okay. All right, let's move on to system variables. Now, this is I'm going to remove these existing ones. This is a very important screen. So let's have a particular scenario in mind. Let's say you're experiencing issues with your device, and now you want to troubleshoot that device as you're interacting that using certain system variables. Well, I can go to my variables here. Let's open up AV Pro Edge, and I can detect if my hot plug is being detected. That means if the output or inputs, depends on which one you want to do. So let's say I want to know if my media room hot plug on my decoder is detected. Looks like that's false, so that could be a problem. Let's check my office. Let's check my den. And let's check my patio. That looks like that's the only hot plug being detected. So your other TVs could be off, or you might not have anything collected to them. But if you did, what that's saying is that the encoder does not establish the relationship with that device. And you could do the same thing with sources. So if I open up the sources, I can tell if my hot plug is enabled. If my hot tub is enabled for any of the sources as well. So let's close this up and let's check out the hot plugs for the sources. I don't think we have hot plugs for the sources here. Here it is. So satellite, let's see how that's doing. Looks like that hot plug is detecting a signal. Roku? True. Kaleidoscope? Yes. And camera? Yes. So it looks like my 4 encoders have that relationship that's been established with that source device. So video over IP is pretty helpful in troubleshooting. I could also check the integrity. If you have a AV Pro switch, the integrity of the switch, configuration status, it's going to give me that configuration. It's going to tell me what it actually found on the network there, what the connection status is, whether it's online or not, and whether or not anything else like the output names or what's switched and everything else. Let's click clear all and try another driver. Let's say we're having trouble with our Doorbird because we're not receiving notifications. I'm going to open up the Doorbird and I'm going to go to my front door variables. First, I'm going to try that connected state. Looks like 0. Let me try the connected one. It looks like my Doorbird is not connected. That's interesting. Let's add my doorbell ringing, which is false, and motion. Now I'm going to go and try to walk in front of my Doorbird. And you'll see that the motion changed to true. So it looks like I've got something going on there that I got to investigate. You could do the same with your kaleidoscope. Again, most drivers have those connection statuses. So I could see if my system is ready. I could see if it's becoming ready, or if it's idle, or if I want to detect what's going on, like an error, there are certain variables that will point you to errors. For example, let's find this, user input. Maybe there's a user input required. Let's see. That's false. That's good. And there's other things like errors and things like that that are in that as well. Many of them have those variables available to you. Let's go and look at another driver. I'm going to clear these variables and now look at one more driver. Let's go to our Sonos driver. Now on my Sonos, I want to know if my Office Roam, what's going on with it? And you can see all these little data points that you can access here. There's probably too many, but I could also go and see what's going on with that Roam. And I could see connection statuses. There's quite a few here, so you're going to have to find these and find the ones you're looking for. Let's go up to the top again, see if we could find something worth using. Maybe if it's, let's check the battery level of the Roam. Let's see what the battery level is. Not getting any feedback there. How about if let's close this up. Let's see if the name from app is coming in. Yep, that looks like it's coming in. Let's see if there's any, trying to find some errors, but there's so many variables. Let's see if it has a TV. Let's try a duration. Let's see if there's a duration present. Nope. Looks like it's 411. So whatever song I'm using is set to 411. So you could use all of these devices to troubleshoot some of the variables. Let's go to one more. Let's try the DSP. I know we've got some connection statuses here. Let's go to zones info. Let's see if any zone is on. True, there are zones on. Let's go to the 8046 info and let's see if the device is connected. Yes, it's connected. Let's see what the firmware version is. That's a cool way to do it. Let's see if it's on. Yeah, looks like the 8046 is off right now. Okay, so you can still do all that feedback. So you're going to want to interact with this system when you have problems with drivers and make sure that this interaction is producing the correct results. Once you're done, click clear. Now we're going to move on to flags. Now flags are going to change based on what you select in the system. So let's say you've got a gate that's opening and closing, right? And let's say that that gate has an issue and you're setting a flag when the gate opens and when the gate closed. Looks like it just changed. Well, someone just basically opened the gate, closed the gate. So now the gate is true. And now if someone opens the gate, let's see what happens. Looks like those flip-flop. We'll give that, there it goes. So you're going to want to monitor these flags and make sure that they're getting set. Now, a lot of times I'll put flags into a system macro. Let's say one of the commands is not getting sent for some reason. I'll put a flag in there right after the command so I know that that section of the macro is definitely running. Or I'll trigger an event that sets a flag. In this case, every time my flag is open and the sense input detects a contact closure, it's going to set a flag. So now I know with the flag if that gate's open or closed. And now I can trigger pop-ups. So if you're having trouble with flags or you're having trouble with commands, flags can be a helpful section to follow. Let's go on to system log. Now, in the system log, this is where you're going to create logs, mostly for our tech support team and engineering team, depending on the type of problem you're experiencing. Or sometimes you become savvy enough to kind of figure it out on your own. So let's look at some of these logs that you could do. Under events or buttons, this is if you're troubleshooting a situation where you're sending commands. So I could either do none, I could send connect, see what the connections are, user actions. So what if I'm troubleshooting user actions? And now I select a button on one of my devices. Now you'll see the interaction on top and you could see the command being set and what it's doing. Looks like there's an error opening up my Leap driver. I got to look at that. There could be some issue there. I know the issue is that I haven't put that online yet, but that would be a situation where you would monitor user actions. You could also monitor connections. So now when I press a button, It tells you if the button is up or button is down. It's monitoring the button connections, like opening and closing relays, and so on and so forth, and commands you sent. Also, messages. So now if I select the same button, it's going to give me the messages as well with those error commands as well. I'm not doing anything extremely crazy here. So you can see that there's not much to look at, but this is really helpful when you're just pressing ordinary buttons. Now I'm going to leave this on none, and I could do to events. What if there's events running? So again, I could monitor connections. Let's clear this log out, and now I can monitor. Let's go messages. Let's see if there's anything that will run. Let's do a periodic connection. Let's do a driver event. Let's see if there's anything running, and a sense event. Let's see if there's any expansion device connection issues. Doesn't look like anything's going on. Let's see what our RTI panel connections look like. Now, if I open my virtual panel, let's see if those connections come in here. So now you can tell real time what's going on in your system. So this is really helpful. Let's go to the kaleidoscope and go to user actions. And then I'm going to go on my controller here. I'm going to start interacting with my kaleidoscope. I'm going to click on my kaleidoscope, and maybe I'm going to go to my pause command. I'm going to pause the movie. So now you can see that the driver says it's ready. I'm going to click on the pause, maybe stop, maybe play. Maybe that's not the one to do. Let's do messages. And let's see what happens when I interact with this. So now you can see that the kaleidoscope is sending out messages, telling you what it's doing, sending some, then respond to a screen mask or a content color, which I had as an event built in. And the same holds true for the Sonos. We could monitor the connections real time. Let's clear this. Let's see if I go to my Sonos system, what happens when I start interacting with that. Maybe select the music. Yeah, so you can see what's going on there. So this is really helpful when you're interacting with the system. And now you could even save it as a JSON file. That's great for our engineering team. Tech support will instruct you how to do that. Or you can send to as a text file, either for you or for our tech support team. And now you can see the system log has been updated with all that information. Now, it's always a good idea after you finish with the issue there that you want to clear everything and set everything back to none, because this will use memory up on your processor, and to avoid needless memory usage, set these all back to none when you're finished. You get the idea, okay? So that's XP Diagnostics, which comes in really handy when you're interacting with your system for the first time. Maybe you're experiencing some latency, or you just want to see how your system is behaving. I recommend using it even if your system is not misbehaving. That way you can get an idea of what the drivers are doing, how to use it in a way that's, productive for you, and so on and so forth. Okay, now there's another way to troubleshoot, and that's through our intelligent monitoring service. So I'm going to close this window, and I'm going to open up our system file again, and I'm going to go to our XP Diagnostics. I'm going to select our processor, and I'm going to select under Connected Features, Settings. Now, under the Settings feature is where you can enable the XP Processor Diagnostics. So you'll enable that, and it'll be enabled by default. You just always want to make sure it's enabled if you have an older system that you're using. Now, under RTIQ Cloud Monitoring, let's talk a little bit about RTIQ and how it works. First of all, you're going to want to, if you own the company, you're going to want to set yourself up through our customer service as the owner of the company. And you're going to want to set up your staff as people that are underlying your systems. So in other words, you can give them access to systems, you can control permissions, you can decide what kind of reports they get. So the more important thing to know there is that if somebody leaves the company, you could remove them, and now they don't have access to any of your systems. So that would be what you would do through our customer service. You would call, get an RTIQ account, which is separate then from your dealer account. And if you have any underlying people, you can set them up as people under your company. Okay. Now, that's done behind the scenes, and that will appear under your account. So you're going to want to, if you want to use RTIQ, in other words, if you want to monitor this system, you're going to want to enable cloud monitoring. Now, right now, my status is not configured because I have to go and configure my account. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to enter in my username and my password. Hopefully I entered the right one. Let me try that again and click OK. And if your account is right, it will say status now configured. Now we know that RTIQ is configured. If we load up our system will sort of appear under RTIQ. But we've got some more work to do. Now, we're going to go down to the connected features now that we've configured RTIQ with our account and we turned it on for this particular system, the Bennett residence. We're going to go to RTIQ monitored devices. Now, RTIQ allows you to monitor your devices, catch problems before the customer even notices. And you can trigger actions to help either heal this system remotely, reduce downtime, and avoid those unnecessary service calls and truck rolls, while, of course, increasing your customer satisfaction. That's the whole intent behind RTIQ. Okay? Now, first, we're going to decide what devices in our current system that we're going to monitor. Okay? And we're going to add, there's a window that pops up when we click add. The first thing we can do is configure whether or not we want to receive a report when there's an exception for this device. For example, we might just want to make sure that the client's projector is on HDMI 1. And maybe we don't want to get an error alert or a log that comes to us via email or text or both that says, hey, the customer's projector is not on HDMI 1. Maybe that's something we want to know in our dashboard, but not something we necessarily want to get an error exception report for. So we could decide whether or not we want to enable or disable the error reporting for this particular monitor device. Now, before I name any devices, there's 3 ways to monitor your devices. First, pinging. We all know what pinging does. It makes sure that device is live on the network. It'll ping the device and make sure that it can connect to that device or ping the device. And if it has the connection, it will report back a positive. And there's some devices that you should never lose connection to on the network. An example of that would be, let's say, our NAS drive that we're using on our system because we want to make sure that we can access our music with the Sonos system. And if our NAS drive goes down, well, besides our music, we're also going to have other problems. So maybe we want to monitor our NAS drive. So I'm going to enter in our NAS drive. We'll call it Synology NAS. And I'm just going to make sure that that device continues to ping. And because of that, I need to enter in the IP address of this Synology drive. My drive is 1.70. Okay? That's all you got to do. And now if you want, you could put in the name of the NAS, model number. If you have it, I'm just making stuff up. The serial number. That's for you to manage your equipment and know what firmware the client is on, at least from when you installed this system. That way, you know what firmware he has, at least things auto update and stuff like that. But for the most part, it's just information for you. Now, if I click OK, that Synology NAS is added to my monitor devices. And if that thing doesn't ping at that IP address for any reason, well, I'm going to get an error message. And we'll talk about the front end of this a little bit later. Okay? Now, there's other things you could do as well. Let's ping another device. What if I want to make sure my Peloton is on? So I'm going to go and ping my Peloton. I want to make sure my Peloton is always on. So when I turn it on, I know that that thing is ready for action. So I'm going to put in my IP address in my Peloton, and I'm just going to enter in the information, Bike Plus, and so on, and then click OK. And now, if the client's Peloton is not working, well, or not connecting to the network, I will get an error exception. And now I could either call them and say, hey, you've got an issue with your Peloton. Did you unplug it, or did you change your Wi-Fi for some reason or something or other, or disconnect it? Okay. So you're going to monitor what you need to monitor. Now there's other things you could do as well. Another type of monitoring type we can do is IP communication. And that's typically if you want to monitor what's going on between the IP address and the port. So if you have any devices that are using ports to communicate, pool controllers, maybe they're using a port, an external port that's open, or if you're using a camera, let's say, maybe you want to monitor the RTSP port or the ONVIF port. So let's do that. Let's monitor the port of my camera. So I'm going to call this clear camera, and I'm going to select IP, which allows me not only to monitor the IP address, but the port as well. And the ONVIF port, 8999. And now I can put in the manufacturer and the model. I don't know what the model is, so I'll just guess. Okay. And now click OK. Now, for some reason, if communication stops and that port doesn't stop and stops communicating with that IP address, you're going to receive an error message. Let's do another one. Sonos uses a port 1400. So let's monitor the Sonos. Let's put in the Sonos IP address, and let's put in that port. And now we can put in Sonos, ARC, etc. And now, if that Sonos port stops communicating, maybe we'll disable this because I don't want to get an error. But if the client does call me with an issue, I can tell if he's playing it. I can tell if the Sonos is communicating to the outside port it uses to get to the Sonos server. Okay, so you can monitor port communication. Now, why this is really helpful is sometimes clients like to swap routers out. Let's say you created a system where your clients have a router where you port forwarded many different ports, maybe a pool controller, maybe an NVR for cameras, maybe some other things they have around the home, well, or business. Well, now, if those ports start failing, you know the client possibly either replaced his router or did something to disrupt that communication. So having that information is a great thing. Now, another great option you have, and my favorite option, is system variable tests. I can monitor any system variable tests, and if there's an exception, I will receive an alert if I choose to enable it. So let's monitor my Lutron Leap. If my Lutron Leap, and you'll just go search for the variable. If my Lutron Leap, let's go to debugging info, and let's go to connected state. If connected state has an issue or has an exception, I will get an alert. And now I'll just put this in, Lutron Leap, and I think the version is 26.12 or something like that, and you get the idea. Okay, it's a great way to also track your serial numbers if you want. Okay, and now if I get an alert, that means my Lutron stopped. The connection state was interrupted. Okay, let's do another one. I'm going to go to another one now. Select system variables, and this time I'm going to monitor my MXNet system, and I'm going to pick one of those hot plugs. So now, if my MXNet system, find the hot plug for any output or input, if the hot plug for my patio all of a sudden does not detect a signal, I will get an error alert. Okay, and now I can say MXNet, and now I can say this is my Sunbright TV veranda, etc. Really helpful. Let's do one more. Let's go to add. Let's go to system variables. And now let's search for different variables. Let's go to my doorbird. Now I can always detect, even in my own home, if the doorbird is connected. And now if it has an exception, I will get an alert. Let's put in the manufacturer. Let's put in the model number. Now I've set up quite a few settings here. Okay. Now that will give you reports, and we'll show you how the reports are tailored and how to set that all up in the front end. But we're still not done yet here, because we still have to configure those actions that allow us to either heal the system, troubleshoot the system, reset the system, whatever we want to do. So I'm going to click RTIQ actions. Now, there's a bunch of different actions that I can create for my RTIQ system. So for example, what if the MXNet system does have a communication issue? Well, I can click add item here, and I'm going to set this one to, I'm going to make this one called reset patio TV hot plug. That will renegotiate the EDID and connection through the HDMI cable from the decoder to the TV and reset that, and we'll see if that heals the client system. Okay. Now down below, I could program this. Let's pull our macro window up. And now when I hit that action, what has to happen? Well, let's go to macro steps, bring in a command. Let's select our AV Pro MXNet system. And now I can go here and find my hot plugs. I can go to the hot plugs, and I can go to my hot plug reset, and I can set this to patio. And that will renegotiate or reset the hot plug by renegotiating the signal with the receiver and the television. Maybe the client did some weird thing with the TV. Maybe he disconnected it and then he connected it, and now you need to renegotiate the signal for some reason. Well, now I could do it remotely. I could do it anywhere in the world I have an internet signal, anywhere I have a web browser. Okay? Let's do another couple of ones. How about resetting the router? So I'm going to go click add, and we're going to call this reset router. Now, I always recommend having IP power management if you want to effectively troubleshoot your system. If you don't want to troubleshoot your system, well, then IP and power management is not necessary. But if you really want to get a good handle on things and be able to heal the system remotely, IP power is always a great idea. So now I'll bring in my command here. Let's go select my watt box. And now from my function here, I'm going to reset my router. And that will reset the router and start resetting the router based on my settings in the system. Okay. All right, let's do one more. Let's reset the satellite box. Click add, because that satellite box is constantly freezing up or constantly in need of problems, constantly having problems. Bring in a command, select our watt box. Again, we're going to go to the outlet that our outlet for our satellite box is. Let's say it's output 4, and we're going to reset that as well. So you will trigger a bunch of actions. Now, also available in the processor, if I click on events, is the ability to reboot your processor schedule. This isn't part of RTIQ or XP Diagnostics, but it all plays in. For example, RTIQ will give you the ability to reboot your processor. So if you want to do it remotely, as long as your system is online, you'll be able to do that. However, if you have a reboot schedule, either weekly, you'll just pick the day of the week you want to do it and the time you want to do it through the 24-hour clock, or you could say daily at a certain time. I recommend 3 a.m. And that way, that will alleviate any cache, any buildup, any issues with problematic drivers. It just might be a good idea if you're experiencing issues. So you'll enable that. Okay. All right. Back to RTIQ. That's how to configure it. And now we will upload our system. And now we're going to go to our dashboard. So I'm going to pull up a web browser here, and I'm going to go to the web browser, bring that in our window, and I'm going to go to our RTI website. I'm going to enter in my credentials and click login. Okay. Now under resources, that's where you're going to find RTIQ. Click it, and this will take you into your system with RTIQ. Now, these will be all your client systems, okay? And you'll have a little map in your general area. Now, this isn't a real system, so bear with me. I won't be able to give you an exact, thing with the whole system, but you can kind of get an idea how this works. So the first thing you're going to do with the monitoring part of this is you're going to see 3 different color pegs. You're either going to see a green peg. That means everything is working perfectly. Everything is okay. Or you might see a yellow peg. I don't see any in this map, but I can always zoom out if I want and see my systems all around the world if I had any, or the US or the general area, right? Yellow means that there's one or more errors in your system, one or more exceptions. So remember we did the hot plug on the patio TV? Maybe that is causing a problem, or more, one or more, and you'll have the yellow peg. Red means your system is offline. Now, hopefully you won't have a lot of offline systems like me, but that's just a test. Now, what you're going to do on here on the current issues side is you're going to be able to drill down to your systems that are experiencing issues. So for example, if I go into Mikey's house, this will give me a bunch of different information here. First, just like diagnostics under Mikey's house, it's going to tell me everything about the system, okay? It's going to tell me the uptime, the firmware, the MAC address, the memory load, the memory used, when the system was last online too. So if the system crashes, it will trap those statistics, making it easier for you to find those problematic devices. With XP Diagnostics, that information isn't trapped. It goes away when the processor goes offline. With RTIQ, that stuff will be saved, and I'll show you some better statistics to look at. Okay, so over here you can see I have one issue, and I've got 62 unknown devices. Not very good. Let's see if there's a better system I can use. Let's scroll down here. Let's go to Kevin's house. This looks like a better system to kind of look at. This one's got 32 devices that are okay, and he's got one error, okay? Now, when he has that one error, we could scroll down here and see he's got an issue with the Hue bridge, and it looks like his ping failed. So he was pinging that bridge, and now it failed. Maybe he removed it and forgot to connect it, or maybe it just went offline for some reason, but that is not pinging, and thus we have an error. And I could go and tunnel in here and see the settings we entered in. It shows you the IP address, the name of the Philips Hue, and if you have a firmware and a serial number as well. Now in this view, you have some other options, but I want to go into this view to show you. I could access drivers, okay? Now under drivers, this is just like XP Diagnostics with a couple of advantages. So you could see he's got DSC, and that's running, and that isn't doing too bad. And you could go through here and see what's happening. I don't think he's home right now, so the system isn't really exhibiting a lot of problems. Now I can see what his memory usage is, but not just his CPU and average and memory, but his last memory. That will show before, if a system goes down, it will show you the last memory before it went down. And one of your devices is using an incredible amount of memory, well, now you can determine if that was the culprit that brought the system down. It'll give you kind of like a suspect, okay? So you can always check that out, okay? See if there's any questions in the Q&A. Nothing yet, so just type them in if you have any questions. Now, again, you're going to get your version, your CPU, the average CPU, your memory peak, and your last known memory, okay? Of course, you have to interact with your system, and you're also going to get a last date of that diagnostic. Okay. All right. So if your system does go down, you'll know when it went down and what that last memory was. A lot of times you'll find a particular driver is the culprit. Okay. All right. Now, what about our actions? These are the actions that you set up to heal your system or to troubleshoot your system. Now, every system will be able to reboot your processor. So if I select that button, the processor will reboot. Whether or not that will clear up that ping is doubtful, but you can heal your system by resetting your processor. So that's not an action you need to configure on your own. Now, under actions here, system off will turn off the system, and this does something with the kitchen TV. I don't know exactly what it does, but that's why you want to make them informative as possible, and that will do whatever that does to heal the system. Maybe it reauthorizes the TV or sends an authorization signal or something like that. Okay, so here's where you could trigger actions and run them remotely, whether you're on vacation or in your office or at home, and you'll know by getting an alert. Now let's talk about alerts. Notifications. This is where you're going to be able to configure for you and your installers notifications. So let's say you want to, let's say the system is offline. You can set this on, and that will basically send notifications hourly if checked. You do have to apply this stuff or save it, but I'm not going to do that. Now, service mode. You could turn the service mode on, which means it will now start sending messages, or you could turn it off. If you turn it off, it will temporarily suspend notifications for either a designated period or just turn them off. Now, a lot of times when you're servicing a rack, you might want to shut it off for 4 or 8 hours, depending on what you're doing, so you're not constantly getting errors when you're taking things down, right? Now, under email notifications, this is where you would put in your email. So let's say dave@xyz.com. And now you can tailor your notifications, whether or not your system is offline, system error, COM report. What a COM report means is it's not going to pepper you with reports all the time until you go crazy. It'll send you a maximum of 12 reports within 24 hours and stop if that's enabled. Okay. Whether or not the system is recovered, whether or not a device is recovered. If an IP address changed, you'll get a notification. You'll get a daily report if you check this, which will give you a report that says, hey, everything's good. Here's what's not good. Okay. And now you could add your email and save the settings. And you could do the same with text alerts as well. Just make sure you add your phone number that you want and save your settings. Now, one cool thing we did here was we give you the ability to enter feedback. So you can go down here and say, I wish RTIQ did this, and click give feedback. Okay. All right. Settings. This is where you configure the settings of your property. Now, in the past, you could use this DNS account before we had remote access and Integration Designer 11. But now you can just enter in your client's address. I think it's address. It tells you the first host name is comprised of 2-name prefix. So you could do the client's last name, maybe his house address. So if his house is 123 Main Street, you could do 123.rtiq.net. And that way you can now monitor your system remotely with a DNS that RTIQ creates. Put it in his address, his city, state. That's important for those pegs you see on the main page. So your peg is properly mapped properly. And now you'll be able to click save and your peg will show up. You could delete your system as well. Be careful with that because it will remove your system. You could always reload it if you choose to add it again. Under notes, you could enter on notes for your client. Maybe he's away for winters or something like that, and save those. So now if you're getting tons of alerts during winter time, you know he's away for winter and he probably shut down his circuit breaker or something. Okay. History will give you a list of all the devices out there over a period of time that have exhibited problems. Now, RTIQ is a great way to charge your client recurring revenue. And here's one of the things you could do to leverage that. What you could do is spot those devices that have been problematic over time. So for example, let's say we've got that Hue bridge, which is historically have been an error. We can now propose to the client to either replace that device with something else, something more reliable, or we can give him alternative service options. So now you can show the client a running count of his history. Now, this is just for you to view, and you could search for things, clear your system. Under reports is where you could generate a report of that. So if I want to generate a report, a 12-month report, click View Report, save that, and now it will give you a 12-month report in an Excel file of all the things that have gone wrong over the last 12 months. And now you could present this to a client and say, hey, I've got some opportunities for you to really increase the reliability of your system. Now let's talk a little bit about the configuration part of this thing along the top. Dashboard will show you your dashboard. Those are those pegs. Systems will give you a list of all your systems. Green is okay. Red, yellow is one or more errors. Red is offline. Okay. Users is going to give you a list of all your employees. Now, if you click on an employee, you're going to be able to set up some certain permissions. First, their name and their dealer, their first name and their status in terms of being active or not, their access level. So there's a few access levels that you'll be able to change if you're the administrator account. I'm not the administrator account here. There's admin, there's user, and there's another one that I forget which one it is, but you can basically configure permissions for your deal, for your end users, not end users, your installers. So now they can access the same systems you do. So maybe you've got a tech that's running around doing service calls all day. Well, now they can monitor the system just like you can. But if they ever leave the company, you have the ability to revoke their privileges. You could also automatically add notifications, or you could not automatically add notifications. And you could have it so that they can update notifications with defaults or do not update notifications with default. Or you could remove all notifications for that user and click Save. Okay? Now, under dealer settings, this is your information. You're going to put your logo. So you're going to go find a pretty cool logo, your company logo. You're going to see the requirements here. It could be a JPEG, PNG, or GIF. Maximum file size, 256 kilobytes. And so you'll set up your company here. Nice little touch. Okay. Dealer site. We'll take us back to the dealer site and support. We didn't turn this feature on yet, but you could actually contact support here or allow support access. Now we just give you the ability to contact support when you have those issues with that integration designer feature. So that feature is redundant. Just go to integration designer, help, submit feature request or problem report, which is a better way to do it. And you could say, hey, RTIQ told me that my system is exhibiting this issue. I don't understand why. And so that will send your project file and other useful statistics. Okay. And that's RTIQ. Again, you're going to set this up through our customer service and all your installers underneath your company so you could manage them under your users. Here you can see there's quite a few users, but these would show up as either dealer admin, user, or limited privileges. I forget what the name of that was. Oh, here it is. Sorry, customer users or dealer users. So you can even give your customer access to these reports should you do so. Don't recommend doing that. I recommend being the hero and getting those reports before the customer does. That way you can call them and say, hey, there's a problem with such and such. I just sent a command to heal it. Let me know if things are okay. It says it's okay. And now you look like someone who cares about the system more than they do. And that way you can get recurring revenue. Okay? So RTIQ, Intelligent Monitoring, XP Diagnostics to monitor and troubleshoot your systems as they're online. Thank you so much for attending. That was XP Diagnostics and RTIQ, Intelligent Monitoring. We'll see you next time.